What in God's name is that noise? Somebody left a dying cat in my studio. Bradford Sloane didn't turn around when he said it. He didn't have to. Everybody on that soundstage knew exactly who he was talking to, because everybody on that soundstage had learned, over 4 seasons of live television, that Bradford Sloane's voice carried further than any microphone ever could. Bring her out here. Let the whole country see this. A stagehand's hand closed around Naomi Carter's wrist before she'd even set down her mop bucket. Gray water sloshed onto her sneakers. She smelled like bleach and floor wax, and the particular exhaustion of a woman 4 hours into an 8-hour shift. And when the stage door swung open and the light hit her, 600 people in that Memphis studio audience got their first look at her. Rubber gloves still dripping, hair tucked under a faded do-rag, badge clipped crooked to a uniform, 2 sizes too big. Bradford wrinkled his nose like she'd tracked something in on her shoe. Lord have mercy, I can smell you from here. He turned to the camera, milking it, working the room the way he'd worked rooms for 11 years. I'll tell you what, America. I'll quit this show tonight, on my father's grave, if this woman can sing. The audience laughed. Not everyone, but enough. Sir, I was just cleaning the... That's all you'll ever be good for, sweetheart. He said it soft, almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. Now be a good girl and go on back to your mop. Naomi said nothing. Her right hand found her apron pocket and closed around something small and hard. A chipped porcelain button, no bigger than a dime, worn smooth from years of being touched exactly like this. She didn't cry. She didn't shake. What came out of her mouth 90 seconds later would end Bradford Sloane's career, and it would take the rest of the night to understand why. 3 hours earlier, Naomi Carter had clocked in for the night shift at WMTN-TV in Memphis, Tennessee. Badge number 2214. Department, Janitorial Services, Building C. She was 34 years old, and this was the only job that had taken her 6 years ago, after she'd dropped out of Bradford College in her junior year. Not because she'd failed a single class, but because her mother had started coughing blood into a bathroom sink on a Tuesday morning in March, and somebody had to pay for what came next. Loretta Carter had been diagnosed with stage 3 emphysema at 53. The oxygen concentrator that hummed beside her bed cost more every month than Naomi cleared in 2 paychecks combined. There were the inhaler refills, the pulmonologist visits at Baptist Memorial, the 2 a.m. drives to the ER on Poplar Avenue, when Loretta's breathing turned into a high, thin whistle that wouldn't stop no matter how many pillows Naomi propped behind her back. None of it had a safety net under it, just a mop, a time clock, and a daughter who had made up her mind that her mother would not die alone in a waiting room chair. Naomi had once been something else, though. 13, she'd joined the youth choir at Mount Calvary Church of God in Christ on Elvis Presley Boulevard, and the choir director, a retired opera tenor named Reverend Isaiah Cole, 71 years old, built like a doorframe, with hands that shook a little from Parkinson's, but a voice that could still rattle the stained glass, had stopped her cold after the second hymn of her very first rehearsal. Child, he'd said, do you have any idea what the Lord put inside you? She hadn't. He spent the next 9 years showing her. Free lessons every Wednesday and Saturday in the church basement. Folding chairs stacked against a wall, stained with 40 years of gospel sweat. Breath control, diction, the way to push air from the diaphragm instead of the throat. He taught her areas she couldn't pronounce the first year and spirituals she'd known since before she could walk. And somewhere in the middle of all that, he took her comfortable, churchy alto and turned it into a soprano that could crack a wine glass at 30 feet. Your voice is not for sale, and it is not for silence, he told her once, pressing a small porcelain button into her palm. The last button off his own choir robe, the one he'd worn for 40 years before his knees gave out and he had to stop standing at the front. You keep this, and you remember whose you are. Reverend Cole died 4 years ago. A stroke, alone in his apartment on Person Avenue, found by a neighbor 2 days later because nobody thought to check on him sooner. Naomi sang at his funeral. It was the last time she'd sung in front of another living soul. After that, she put the button in her apron pocket and went quiet. She hummed sometimes. In the shower, on the number 32 bus down Poplar, in the empty third-floor hallway of WMTN-TV at 2 in the morning, pushing a mop across tile that would be filthy again by 9 a.m. The station never saw her. Not really. To the day staff, she was a time slot and a badge number. Some of them called her the ghost because she came and went without anybody clocking her face. Her supervisor, a man named Otis Marsh, preferred it that way. Otis smiled at his bosses and barked at everybody beneath him, and he ran the overnight janitorial crew like a man auditioning for a promotion that was never going to come. Naomi had watched him write up 3 different cleaners in a single month for violations he'd invented on the spot. All 3 were black women. None of them fought it. You didn't fight Otis. You needed the paycheck too badly. But the real power at WMTN-TV didn't sit behind a supply closet. It sat in a leather chair under 4,000 watts of studio lighting, and it belonged to Bradford Sloane. Sloane had been the anchor judge on Voice of Tomorrow for 4 seasons running, and he was famous for exactly 2 things: an ear that could pick a star out of 1,000 auditions, and a mouth that had turned takedowns into a personal brand. The internet loved his cruelty. The producers loved his ratings. Contestants were terrified of him, and with good reason. 18 months earlier, he'd told a 17-year-old girl on live television that her voice sounded like a screen door in a hurricane, and the clip had pulled 31 million views in 4 days. What the public didn't know, what had been buried under 3 separate non-disclosure agreements, sealed by network lawyers and scrubbed from every internal record that mattered, was that 4 former contestants, all of them black, had filed formal complaints, alleging Sloane graded them differently, marked them down for the wrong hair, the wrong church, the wrong kind of gospel run. All 4 settlements had come with a signature and a check and an instruction never to speak of it again. Bradford Sloane didn't simply dislike certain voices. He disliked certain people, and he had exactly enough power to make that dislike disappear into paperwork. On the night everything changed, Naomi was mopping the main stage during a 15-minute break in rehearsal. The studio was supposed to be dark. The cameras were supposed to be off. A backup feed had been left running for an unrelated sound check, and Naomi, alone under half-lit work lamps, certain nobody could hear her, hummed a few bars of an old hymn, closed her eyes, and let herself actually sing. 11 seconds. That was all it took. The sound tech monitoring that backup feed, a 25-year-old named Julian Reyes, played the clip back 3 times before he saved it to his phone. He didn't post it anywhere. He showed exactly one person, his shift supervisor, and said 4 words: "You need to hear this." By 9 the next morning, that 11-second clip had passed through 14 phones inside the building. Camera operators, makeup artists, a grip who watched it standing in the parking garage stairwell because he didn't want anyone to see him tear up. Nobody told Naomi any of it was happening. The clip reached Bradford Sloane at 10:52 a.m., forwarded by his assistant with a single line: "You're going to want to see this." He watched it in his dressing room, boots up on the vanity, coffee in hand. He didn't cry. He didn't even sit up straight. He laughed. A janitor, he said, to nobody. A janitor singing opera. He had the executive producer, a sharp, tired woman named Renata Voss, on the phone before lunch. "I want her on tonight's live broadcast." Renata hesitated. "Bradford, she's not a contestant. She's cleaning crew." "Exactly, that's the segment. We bring her out, let her humiliate herself in front of 20 million people, and the ratings go through the roof. Nothing America loves more than watching somebody crash and burn. Especially somebody who never should have thought she belonged up there in the first place. There was a pause on the line long enough to mean something. "That's cruel, Bradford. That's television." He hung up before she could answer. By that afternoon, a memo had gone out. Surprise talent segment, live episode 19. Naomi Carter listed under featured guest. Nobody asked her permission. Nobody told her what was coming. Bradford Sloane had found his entertainment for the night, and he had no idea. He'd also just found the woman who would end his career. Otis Marsh found Naomi restocking paper towels on the second floor at 7:44 that evening. "Drop it. Come with me. Now. My shift doesn't cover the studio floor. I've got the East Wing too. The judges want you. Move." She followed him down 2 flights through the service corridor, into the wings behind Studio A, and the sound hit her before the light did. Applause, a live band, Bradford Sloane's voice booming off the walls. The broadcast was already rolling. 600 people in the seats, 4 cameras, 20 million homes on the other end of that signal, and Bradford Sloane, grinning at her like a man who'd already won something. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, sweeping an arm toward the wings, "I'd like you to meet somebody very special tonight. This is our overnight cleaning lady. She apparently thinks she's the next Whitney Houston." The audience erupted, laughter, whistles. Somebody in the front row, already holding up a phone. Naomi's legs locked. Every instinct in her body said, "Turn around. Walk back through that door, disappear into the service corridor where nobody would ever come looking." She almost did. Then her hand found her apron pocket. The button was there, small and worn smooth, and Reverend Cole's voice came back to her steady as a metronome. "Your voice is not for sale, and it is not for silence." Bradford was still going, still performing for the cameras. "I'll quit this show tonight if this woman can sing," he said again, louder, drawing it out. America, hold me to that." Naomi looked at the audience. She looked at the cameras. She looked at Bradford Sloane, the man who had dragged her out here to make himself feel bigger. She didn't turn around. She walked to the microphone and wrapped both hands around the stand, like it was the only solid thing left in the world. The studio went quiet in pieces, not all at once. A few laughs still lingering in the back rows, somebody coughing, a camera operator adjusting focus, expecting a wreck worth replaying. Bradford leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, smirking sideways at the other judges. Camille Roswell, the second judge, sat rigid, lips pressed flat, eyes locked on Naomi. She wasn't laughing. The third judge, a quiet former record producer named Desmond Hale, who rarely spoke unless it mattered, tilted his head and waited. The band leader raised his baton just slightly. "Whenever you're ready," he said, quiet enough that only she could hear it. Naomi closed her eyes. She thought about the church basement on Elvis Presley Boulevard, the upright piano with 2 dead keys, Reverend Cole's shaking hand on her shoulder, the way he used to count her in, not with numbers, with a nod, slow and certain, like he was granting her permission to exist out loud. She breathed in through her nose. She held it until the silence in that room felt like something with weight. And then she began. The first note came out thin, fragile, barely reaching the second row. Somebody snickered. A man in the 5th row elbowed his friend and pointed. Bradford's smirk widened. He leaned over and whispered something behind his hand to Camille. Camille didn't respond. Then the second note landed, deeper, fuller, a low soprano tone that rolled across the studio floor like warm water finding every corner of the room. The snickering stopped. The whispering stopped. The man who'd pointed lowered his hand. The front 3 rows seemed to stop breathing altogether. She was singing Ave Maria. Not the arrangement most people knew, but a version Reverend Cole had handwritten for her over 4 months of Saturday afternoons, transposed note by note on staff paper he kept in a metal box under his bed. He'd told her once it was the hardest thing he'd ever composed. He'd told her she was the only voice he trusted to carry it. By the 3rd phrase, the room had changed completely. The laughter was gone. Phones that had been raised to record her humiliation were still recording, but the hands holding them had gone slack. A woman in the fourth row pressed her palm flat against her mouth. A man near the aisle took off his glasses and stared at his lap. Two teenagers lowered the screens they'd been scrolling and just looked at her. Naomi's voice climbed. Each note carried more weight than the last. Not louder, deeper, as though every year of silence had compressed into pressure, and that pressure was finally being let out one phrase at a time. The melody moved through registers that shouldn't have been possible from a woman who hadn't performed in 4 years. But the voice didn't know about the 4 years. The voice only knew the Saturday lessons, the basement piano, the hours of scales sung into an empty sanctuary while afternoon light crawled across the wooden floor. She didn't need to open her eyes. The music was doing what it had always done, telling a truth she couldn't say out loud. The truth about the oxygen tank and the emergency room bills. The truth about mopping floors at 2 in the morning while the rest of the city slept. The truth about a teacher who believed in her before anybody else did, and who died before he ever got to see what she'd become. Bradford Sloane had stopped smirking. His arms had uncrossed. His palms were flat against the judge's table, as if the wood was the only thing keeping him upright. His jaw had gone slack, and for the first time in 4 seasons of live television, Bradford Sloane had absolutely nothing to say. Camera 2 caught it, a slow zoom on his face, the precise instant his arrogance cracked in half. The director's voice came through every headset in the building. "Stay on him. Do not cut away." 20 million people watched it happen in real time. Desmond Hale closed his eyes and bowed his head, fingers laced together on the table, and didn't move again for the rest of the song. Camille Roswell stood up. She didn't clap. She didn't say a word. She simply rose from her chair, hands clasped against her chest, and stood there, a judge on her feet before a performance had even finished. In 4 seasons, it had never happened. Not once. The song built toward its peak. Naomi hit the note Reverend Cole had circled in red ink on that staff paper, the one beside which he'd written, in his careful shaking handwriting, "This is where you fly." The note didn't just fill the studio. It climbed into the lighting rig, found the cameras, and rode the signal into 20 million living rooms, 20 million cars, 20 million pairs of earbuds on 20 million evening commutes. A stagehand in the wings sat down hard on a cable box and put his head in his hands. A makeup artist pressed her forehead against the wall backstage and wept without making a sound. The audience was on its feet before the last note had even faded. Not a slow rise, a wave, row by row, front to back, 600 people rising like a tide. A teenage girl in the balcony buried her face in her mother's shoulder. An elderly man in a faded army veteran's cap pressed his palm flat against his chest and left it there. Naomi held the final note for 6 full seconds, then let it go. She opened her eyes, looked out at that wall of strangers standing for her, and her lower lip trembled once before she pressed it still. Her right hand never left the button in her pocket. The applause didn't stop. It doubled, then tripled, rolling into a roar that pushed the sound meters in the control booth into the red. Bradford Sloane sat frozen in his chair, mic still hot, 20 million people waiting for the man who always had something to say something. The silence lasted 9 full seconds. 9 seconds of Bradford Sloane, mouth open, hands flat on the table, being exactly what he dragged her out there to make her look like. Camille Roswell reached over and quietly pressed his microphone button off. Then she looked at Naomi, tears she didn't bother to hide running down her face, and said the only thing that mattered. It had. "Where have you been?" The internet didn't wait for permission. Within 90 minutes, the clip of Naomi Carter singing Ave Maria in a bleach-stained uniform had been screen-recorded, trimmed, captioned, and uploaded to every platform that mattered. By midnight, the janitor voice was the top trending topic in the country. By 2 in the morning, it was trending in 11 countries. The comments piled up by the thousands. I've watched this 40 times and I'm still crying. Bradford Sloane needs to be fired tonight. He said he'd quit. America. We're waiting. And that last line became its own hashtag. We're waiting Bradford, climbing the charts even faster than the original clip. Memes bloomed within the hour, his frozen slack-jawed face photoshopped onto everything from courtroom sketches to deer caught in headlights. A parody account called @BradfordQuits picked up 90,000 followers before sunrise. Bradford Sloane watched it all happen alone in his penthouse off Union Avenue, scrolling in the dark. He didn't sleep. At 6:20 the next morning he called Otis Marsh, that janitor, find something on her. Otis hesitated. Find what, exactly? Anything. She was in a restricted production area during work hours. That's a violation of her employment contract. Write it up. Make it official. Bradford. The whole country just heard her sing. I don't care what the country heard. She made me look like a fool on my own show. Find the violation. File the report. I want her badge deactivated by noon. Otis filed it at 8:15 that morning. Unauthorized presence in a restricted production zone. Unauthorized use of company equipment, meaning the microphone Bradford himself had shoved into her hands. The irony wasn't lost on Otis. He signed the form anyway. He had a mortgage and a daughter starting at the University of Memphis in the fall, and Bradford Sloane was not a man you told no. By 10 a.m., Bradford had made a second call, this one to Renata Voss. I want the segment pulled from the rebroadcast. Scrub it from the network's official channels. Bradford, it's already everywhere. It's the most watched clip this network has produced in 3 years. The board is already. Pull it, Renata, or I walk. She pulled it. The evening rebroadcast aired with Naomi's segment quietly swapped out for a pre-taped interview with a country singer from Nashville. The network's official channels scrubbed the footage. Social media staff were told to stay silent on any inquiry about the janitor incident, but Bradford had forgotten about Julian Reyes. Julian was the 25-year-old sound tech who'd first caught Naomi's voice on the backup feed. He worked in a building where nobody had ever bothered to learn his last name, and he had watched Bradford Sloane humiliate interns, reduce contestants to tears during commercial breaks, and smile the second the cameras came back on. He'd kept his mouth shut every single time, because that was the price of keeping his job. Not this time. Julian had saved the raw, uncompressed footage from the backup camera feed. Full audio, 4 angles, no edits, no cuts. At 11:40 that night, 12 minutes after Bradford's call to Renata, Julian uploaded the complete file from a public library computer 3 miles from the station. The title was plain. Janitor sings Ave Maria, full uncut performance. By morning, it had 2 million views. By the following afternoon, 14 million. Bradford Sloane had wanted to erase Naomi Carter from the record. Instead, he'd turned her into the most talked-about voice in America. The story broke on national morning news the next day. By noon, it was on every network. The headlines varied, but the core stayed the same. A powerful man humiliated a working-class black woman on live television, and she answered with the most stunning vocal performance the show had ever aired, and then the network tried to bury it. The hashtag shifted from the janitor voice to justice for Naomi. The conversation stopped being about talent. It became about power and about who gets to decide whose voice counts. That was when the other women started coming forward. A 24-year-old gospel singer from Little Rock posted a shaky video from her kitchen table, describing how Bradford had told her, off mic during a commercial break, that your kind of church music doesn't test well with our audience. She'd been eliminated the following week. A 21-year-old R&B vocalist from Jackson, Mississippi, shared a screenshot of a production text warning her to tone down the attitude before her audition, a message traced back to Bradford's own team. And the 17-year-old he'd once compared to a screen door in a hurricane posted a single sentence. He knew exactly what he was doing every single time. 4 complaints. 4 black contestants. 4 non-disclosure agreements that suddenly felt a great deal less airtight. WMTN TV's board convened an emergency call at 2 that afternoon. Bradford Sloane's contract was worth $11 million a year, and Voice of Tomorrow generated close to a third of the network's primetime ad revenue. Firing him would cost the network money. Keeping him was starting the network, something far more expensive. Bradford made his own move at 4 p.m. A 30-second video posted to his own account, filmed in his car, sunglasses on, engine running. It was a joke, folks. That's all it was. People are far too sensitive these days. I have nothing but respect for everyone at this network. The video pulled 180,000 dislikes inside the hour. Nobody was laughing with him anymore. Bradford Sloane did not panic the way most people panic, with tears, with trembling hands. He panicked the way powerful men panic. He made calls. The first, at 6:15 the next morning, went to his personal attorney. She appeared on my broadcast without a signed release. No talent waiver. That footage belongs to this network, and I want a cease and desist on her doorstep by end of day. The second call, 25 minutes later, went to Otis Marsh. Terminate her. Otis's voice cracked. Bradford, half the country is watching us right now. You're not firing her for singing, Otis. You're firing her for violating her contract. Unauthorized access. Unauthorized use of equipment. Conduct unbecoming a WMTN TV employee. Pick whichever one sounds best and put it in writing. Your name's on the guest memo, not mine. Your name's on the janitorial supervisor line. You signed her in that door. If this goes sideways, it lands on you first. Understood? Otis understood. That was the whole reason he still had a job. The termination letter went out on WMTN TV letterhead, sealed in an envelope, and Otis drove it to Naomi's apartment off Getwell Road himself. He didn't call ahead. Naomi opened the door in a faded t-shirt, and behind her the apartment smelled like cinnamon and rubbing alcohol. Her mother's morning routine. A handmade birthday card sat propped on the kitchen counter, the kind a daughter makes when she can't spare the money to buy one. It was Loretta's 61st birthday. Otis held out the envelope. I'm sorry, Naomi. She read it standing in the doorway while he stared at his shoes. When she finished, she folded it back into the envelope, set it beside the birthday card, and said, "Thank you for bringing it yourself." He left without another word and sat in his car in the parking lot for 11 minutes before he could bring himself to turn the key. Loretta found the letter that afternoon. She read it twice at the kitchen table. Oxygen tube looped behind her ears, reading glasses slipping down her nose, and then she pressed the paper flat against her chest and cried the kind of crying that comes without sound, just shoulders shaking and air that wouldn't come easy. It's going to be okay, Mama, Naomi told her, holding her. But she didn't believe it, and Loretta knew she didn't believe it. Bradford wasn't finished. At 4 that afternoon, he held a press conference in the station lobby. 3 cameras, 24 reporters, a charcoal suit, a pocket square. The calm expression only money and lawyers can manufacture. I want to be very clear, he said, hands folded on the podium. Miss Carter is a troubled individual. Her behavior on set was erratic. Members of our staff had expressed concerns about her mental stability prior to the incident, and the network acted accordingly. We wish her well, but we have a responsibility to protect our employees and our audience. He took no questions. He smiled once for the cameras and walked back inside. The word unstable trended within the hour. Not because anyone believed it, but because it made people furious. She is not unstable climbed alongside Justice for Naomi. A clinical psychologist in Chicago posted a 12-minute breakdown of Bradford's language, calling it a textbook attempt to discredit a victim before she could speak for herself. Naomi never saw any of it. She was sitting in the last pew of Mount Calvary Church, alone in the dark, the same pew where Reverend Cole used to sit during her Saturday lessons, eyes closed, nodding along to every note. The piano lid was down. The choir robes hung untouched in the closet behind the altar. She pulled the little porcelain button from her pocket, turned it over in her fingers, and didn't sing. She just let the silence press her into the wood. The knock came at 7 that evening. She almost didn't answer. She'd been sitting in the dark for 2 hours. Phone off. Curtains drawn, the store-bought birthday cake on the counter still untouched, candles still in the box. She opened the door to a face she barely recognized. Julian Reyes stood on her doorstep in a wrinkled flannel shirt, laptop bag slung over one shoulder, an expression somewhere between guilt and resolve. "You don't know me," he said. "I'm the one who uploaded the video." Naomi looked at him for a long moment. Then she stepped aside and let him in. They sat at her kitchen table. Julian opened his laptop and turned the screen toward her. 4 raw camera files, time-stamped, unedited, every angle of her performance, every second of Bradford's face crumbling, every second of the audience rising to its feet. But that wasn't what he'd come to show her. He clicked a 5th file, 41 seconds long. It was footage from a camera mounted above the judge's table, and in it, during the second verse of Naomi's performance, Bradford Sloane's hand could clearly be seen reaching under the desk toward a small audio panel. The backup mic control board the judges used during commercial breaks. He toggled a switch labeled MIC44, Stage Center. The board defaulted to the overhead boom mic instead, which was the only reason the audience had still heard her voice at all. He had tried to cut her microphone, live. In front of 20 million people, in the middle of her singing, he had physically tried to silence her. "I pulled this off the raw feed before they wiped the drives," Julian said quietly. "They deleted the backup footage at 6 this morning. If I hadn't saved it the night before, it'd be gone." Naomi stared at the screen, then at him. "Why are you doing this?" Julian closed the laptop. He was quiet for a moment. 2 years ago, Bradford called me a diversity hire in front of the whole crew during a lighting setup. Said the only reason I had a badge was to help the network hit a quota. He paused. I didn't say anything then. I'm saying something now. The second ally came by phone that same night. Camille Roswell called Naomi's personal number at 9 o'clock, a number she'd gotten from a production assistant who owed her a favor. "I'm not calling as a judge," she said. "I'm calling as a witness. I saw what Bradford did under that desk. I didn't understand it in the moment, but I understand it now, and I'll say it on camera, under oath, wherever you need me to." The third ally found Naomi through the internet entirely. Miriam Vance was a civil rights attorney out of Nashville, with 22 years litigating workplace discrimination cases, 2 of which had reached the 6th Circuit. She'd seen the clip on a Tuesday morning and Bradford's press conference that same afternoon. And by Wednesday, she was on a plane to Memphis. She met Naomi at the church. "I'm not here to sell you anything," she said, sitting beside her in the pew. "Here. Because what happened to you is illegal, and the man who did it is still on television, pretending it isn't." Naomi didn't answer right away. She folded the button into her palm, pressed her thumb against it, and said, "I don't have money for a lawyer." "You don't need any. This one's on me." The fourth ally was the one nobody expected. Franklin Deere, a 3-time Grammy-winning record producer, founder of Deere Records, the man who'd launched 6 platinum careers out of a converted warehouse in Nashville, had been watching the clip on a studio monitor when something stopped him cold. Not the voice itself, but the technique, the breath control, the seamless shift between registers. He'd heard that exact method exactly once before, from exactly one man, an old friend who'd taught voice lessons in a church basement on Elvis Presley Boulevard, Reverend Isaiah Cole. Franklin picked up the phone and called his assistant. "Find this woman. Get me on a plane to Memphis tonight." The network billed it as a night of reckoning. An unscheduled, unscripted special broadcast to 36 million viewers on a Friday night, the largest audience the show had ever drawn. The set had been stripped bare. No band, no contestant stage, just 4 chairs, a long table, and a screen mounted behind the judges' panel. Bradford Sloane sat in his usual seat, legs crossed, expression carefully composed. He'd spent the afternoon rehearsing talking points with his lawyer. He believed the network would protect him. He believed his $11 million contract made him untouchable. Naomi Carter walked in from the side entrance in a simple black dress and flat shoes, the porcelain button pinned now to a small ribbon at her collar. Beside her walked Miriam Vance, carrying a leather briefcase and the calm of a woman who had done this exact thing before. The host, Patricia Nguyen, opened with a single question, "Mr. Sloane, do you stand by your comments regarding Miss Carter?" Bradford leaned into his mic. "I've already addressed this." It was a light-hearted moment taken out of. "Then you won't mind," Miriam said, "if we show the audience what happened right after your light-hearted moment." She nodded toward the control booth. The screen lit up. The overhead camera angle Bradford Sloane mid-broadcast, his hand disappearing under the judge's desk, fingers closing over a switch labeled MIC4. Stayed center. The exact moment he tried to silence a woman singing live on national television. Studio audience gasped. Sharp and collective, as though the air had been punched out of 600 lungs at once. Bradford's face went white. That's out of context. I was adjusting sound levels. This is the audio engineer's log from that evening, Miriam said, placing a document flat on the table. Channel 4 was manually toggled off at the 2-minute 14-second mark. The override came from your control panel, Mr. Sloane. Camille Roswell turned toward the camera. I was sitting 3 feet from him. I saw his hand go under that desk. I'm saying it now, on the record, because I should have said it that night. The screen changed again. Text messages between Bradford and Otis Marsh, time-stamped unmistakable. Terminate her. Find something. Unauthorized access. Conduct unbecoming. Pick whichever one sounds best. Your name's on the line, not mine. Bradford's attorney stood. My client will not be responding to. Your client already responded, Miriam said, on camera. He called a woman who was dragged onto a stage without her consent, humiliated in front of 20 million people, and fired without cause, unstable. He called her the problem. The audience erupted. A woman in the 3rd row stood and pointed at Bradford. You said you'd quit. Quit? Others rose with her, the chant spreading through the room. We're waiting, Bradford chanted out loud now, filling the studio until Patricia Nguyen had to raise both hands to settle it. Then a tall, silver-haired man in a navy blazer stood from the 2nd row. Patricia handed him a microphone without being asked, because everyone in the industry recognized his face. I've been in this business 41 years, Franklin Deere said. I've produced records for artists whose names you hear on the radio every single day. I'm standing here tonight because I heard something in that clip I hadn't heard in a very long time. He turned to Naomi. That breath control, those register transitions. I've only ever known one man who could teach a voice to move like that. His name was Isaiah Cole. He was my oldest friend. He died 4 years ago, and I thought his method died with him. His voice caught. He swallowed and started again. It didn't. It's standing right there. In a woman you called a cleaning lady. The network president, Walter Higgins, walked out from the wings carrying a single sheet of paper. He set it on the table in front of Bradford, loud enough for every microphone in the room to catch. Your contract is terminated. Effective immediately. Bradford looked down at the page. He looked up at the 4 live cameras. Every one of them recording the exact moment his career ended on the same stage where he'd tried to end someone else's. He stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked out past the crew, past the audience that had laughed with him once and now watched him leave in total silence. The applause started only after he was gone. It began with Camille Roswell, one slow clap, looking straight at Naomi. Then the crew joined, then the audience, a standing ovation that had nothing to do with him at all. Bradford Sloane's career didn't end with a scandal. It ended with silence. No network called. No producer reached out. His talent agency dropped him in a one-paragraph email that didn't even use his first name. His social following, once 4 million strong, bled 200,000 followers in a single week. He posted nothing. He said nothing. The man who always had something to say disappeared into the noise, and the noise didn't even notice. Otis Marsh was demoted the following Monday, stripped of his supervisory title, reassigned to overnight equipment maintenance, the exact same hallways Naomi had once cleaned. The network required a public written apology posted beneath a banner reading our commitment to accountability. Otis wrote it himself. 4 paragraphs. The last line read, "I should have said no. I didn't. I'm sorry." Naomi read it once and never mentioned it again. A community fundraiser closed at just over $400,000. Naomi used the first portion to clear 18 months of unpaid oxygen concentrator rentals, 2 emergency room bills, and a specialist consultation that had been scheduled and canceled 3 times because she couldn't cover the copay. She used the rest to move her mother into a ground-floor apartment near Overton Park, wider doorways, better airflow, a window that faced a small garden where morning light came through clean. Loretta sat by that window on the day they moved in, breathing easier than she had in years, and said, "You did this with your voice, baby." Naomi shook her head. "I did this with a mop and a prayer." The voice just finally showed up when I stopped being afraid of it. Franklin Deere signed Naomi to Deere Records 3 weeks after the broadcast. The contract was modest by industry standards, no arena tour, no forced brand deals, no pressure to become anyone she wasn't. He'd watched the machine chew up talent before, and he had no intention of feeding her into it. "We're going to make 1 album," he told her in his Nashville studio, surrounded by gold records and photographs of artists who'd stood at same room decades earlier. "We're going to make it right, and we're dedicating it to Isaiah." The album took 4 months to record. 3 arias, 2 spirituals, 2 original compositions Franklin wrote using notes pulled from Reverend Cole's old teaching journals, which Naomi had kept in a shoebox under her bed for 4 years. The final track was a solo piano arrangement of Amazing Grace, the hymn she'd been humming that night in the empty studio when everything began. She called the album The Basement. WMTN-TV eventually offered her the vacant judge's seat on Voice of Tomorrow in a private meeting with the network president, 2 board members, and Miriam Vance. Naomi accepted on one condition. "I want the network to fund a music scholarship," she said, "for kids who can't afford lessons. Name it after Isaiah Cole." The Isaiah Cole Music Foundation launched 6 weeks later with a $1 million endowment from the network, matched by Franklin Deere and 3 other industry names. Its first class, 12 scholarship students, ages 14 to 20, from 6 different states, began training that fall. On the day of the foundation's launch ceremony, held in the same WMTN-TV studio where it had all begun, Naomi stood at the same microphone, on the same stage, under the same lights. The chair where Bradford Sloane used to sit was empty now. In its place, mounted on a small wooden stand behind the judge's table, sat a glass case. Inside it, a single porcelain button rested against black velvet, and beneath it a brass plate read, "Your voice is not for sale, and it is not for silence. Isaiah Cole." Naomi looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked out at the 12 young scholars sitting nervously in the front row, clutching their acceptance letters. She smiled, and she sang. 6 months after the broadcast that changed everything, on a quiet Saturday afternoon, Naomi Carter walked back through the doors of Mount Calvary Church of God in Christ. The pews weren't empty anymore. 12 young voices filled the room. Uneven, uncertain, some too loud and some too soft, all of them trying. The Isaiah Cole Foundation's first class had begun its weekly sessions in the very same basement where Naomi had once stood as a 13-year-old girl who had no idea what she was carrying inside her. She set her bag down beside the old upright piano, the one with 2 dead keys, and listened. A girl in the front row, no older than 15, kept slipping flat on the 3rd interval of a scale. A boy beside her hummed something. Nobody had asked him to hum, eyes closed, chasing a melody only he could hear. Naomi didn't correct them. Not yet. She let them stumble. She let them reach. She let them sound exactly like what they were, beginners standing at the edge of something they didn't fully understand yet. Then she sat down at the piano, placed her fingers on the keys, and played a single chord. The room went still. "Let's start again," she said from the top. "And this time, don't be afraid of the note. Just let it out." 12 voices rose together, rough and imperfect and alive, and Naomi closed her eyes and listened, and for one long moment, she heard Isaiah Cole's voice steady underneath theirs, counting them in the way he always had. Not with numbers, with a nod. Outside, the afternoon sun moved slowly across the same wooden floor it had crossed every Saturday for 20 years. Nothing in that room had changed, except the person now sitting at the piano, and everything had changed because of her.